Councillor Rex Graham, the Chair, Rex Graham, will be phoning in. Will he be phoning in?
No, he's not.
He's not?
He's given his apologies, sorry.
An apology from Councillor Rex Graham. Before I take the apologies, I'd like to ask Mr Mike Mohi if he'd like to open the meeting for me, please.
Before I do that, I'd just like to bring your attention that one of the former Māori committee members died last week. Rangi Rupaha served in the early 2000s. Great mate of mine, great football mate, and had dementia for probably the last 15 or so years. No rere pākahuri mātou ki a koe I tēnei ahi. Manaki tia I a mātou e kōre o rero ana ngā mea e pana ki a tō mātou kaupapa ki te tiaki mai o te whenua me te mōna me ngā awa o ka hangunu whānui koe nei mea ka pātai ki runga I tingo I hukarati a ka kia mene.
Thank you, Mike. I have an apology for the Chair, Rex Graham. I'll move the apology, Mr Stein. Second to Councillor Fenton Wilson. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Item 2, conflict of interest declarations. Did any member got a conflict?
Mr Chairman, just a notice, I'd like to take up my leave of absence as from tomorrow. I'll get back as soon as I can and do what I can, but the I guess the period is indeterminate. Councillor Wilson will be acting Transport Chair and be chairing the meeting tomorrow. I think he might possibly be looking for an alternate to take my place, not as chairman, but as a second voting member.
Councillor Wilson's already shoulder tapped me for that role, Chair. If that's acceptable to the council.
Well, let's deal with one thing at a time. Firstly, thank you for the notice of your absence. The Council wishes you the very best for a successful operation and a speedy full recovery, and we look forward to continuing taking up your favourite sport of long distance running again sometime shortly. As for Councillor Bailey, I think we should have an independently scrutinised secret ballot on that. No, perfectly fine. Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Conflict of interest declarations. Do we have any conflicts of interest that people haven't yet declared or have accumulated in the last week or two or month? There being none, I advised. Everybody's clean. Confirmation of the minutes of the Regional Council meeting held on the 15th of November. I don't wish to go through them page by page, line by line. Anybody has any issues with them? Not being the case, would have a mover for the minutes. Councillor Wilson, do I have a seconder? Councillor Belford. Put the resolution as a procedural motion. All those in favour will say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Is there... you would say the same. Right, any follow-ups from the previous council meeting? Item 4. Follow-ups. Are you going to lead us through with this, Chief Executive?
Look, I'll take it as read, Chair. I think most of these items have been actioned.
All right.
Or are still in action.
Any questions on follow-ups? Local government, Al Lagoima requests. Any questions on that? Could I just say to you on the one about the council spend on Christmas decorations, could I ask that when you reply to that, whatever the cost is that we've identified, I'd like you also to put on the answer the actual cost incurred by this council, including all overheads, in compiling the answer. Wouldn't do that in any other case, but on this one. Councillor Wilson?
Just a question through you, Chair, to Ms Lambert in regard to the working group on the REM authority. Have you got no idea when that august group might meet again before the...
There was some difficulty getting everyone to meet, Councillor. I'm proposing that there be a paper go to the Corporate and Strategic Committee on the 11th of December, so that has to be prepared in the next few days. Basically, the proposal that I'll be putting to you is to support the Local Government New Zealand submission, which is very comprehensive, and so there'll just be some information coming out to the working group in the next couple of days to get support for that approach and or support for the content, actually, because the whole paper will be coming out to you with the idea that it's put on the agenda by Monday of next week.
Thank you. Oh, a different question. I'm just interested in Colliers International. What is that? Who is that? Just Colliers International, Vernon, Sequira.
They are a property company. Yeah.
Commercial property company. They're using the Lagoima to obtain information that would help them in their commercial endeavours, it would seem. I don't think we'd have grounds to
No, we
decline
can
it.
charge for it. Over above an hour,
Okay.
they'll get charged. Yeah.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you.
Microphone.
Mariah Kakaho Quarry. James, are there some health and safety concerns that we should be concerned about, or are you all over that?
So, Russell Roads, the company in question, is not a contractor of ours. They have a gravel extraction permit. As I understand, the concerned citizens have a view that because they have a gravel extraction permit that we have some health and safety obligations with respect to Russell Roads. Our legal advice is that we don't. However, they have been part of the site-wise assessment for the Hastings District Council and have been satisfactorily assessed in terms of health and safety. This is a part of a much longer running dispute around gravel extraction and gravel crushing activities proximal to a number of lifestyle blocks at Morakakaho. And so essentially our answer back to them is that we don't have a responsibility in this area.
Do we have any
Councillor
responsibility? Thank you, Chair. Do we have any responsibility for that operation? Because a number of us have heard complaints, and including from the now mayor of Hastings. Do we have a role in any of this?
Well, look, we have responsibility so much as we have permitted the gravel extraction from the location. It's an important site, obviously, for gravel extraction for flood management purposes, and we have attempted to work with the company and the local community on alternatives along that strip, and there are not many. There aren't any actual viable alternatives at this point, and therefore it remains an important place for gravel extraction to occur. The bigger issue for the community does appear to be where the crushing of the gravel is going on. That's the noisiest and dustiest part of the operation. That, I believe, is on Hastings District Council land and under an HDC land use consent at present, so as a question for them. But as I understand it, the most practical place for the gravel crushing to occur is on site there. So it's frustrating for the local community. That's a bit of a pass around between various folk. But from our perspective, for the operation to cease there in terms of the gravel extraction would be a serious concern in terms of flood management.
Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the last Lagoima request, details of farm seriously non-compliant with consent conditions. How have we gone about defining what is seriously non-compliant?
Look, I'll attempt to answer. Mrs. Lambert might have something to add in that. There's a policy that we have around how we treat, how we determine what's a serious and what is a non-serious breach of compliance, and typically within the consent conditions on a dairy farm, for example, there are matters which we have by policy deemed to be serious and those which are more of a more trivial nature. So I think quite responsibly the applicant here is not asking for examples of absolutely everything. They are asking about the serious non-compliance.
Any other questions? Councillor Belford.
With respect to that same request and two above it coming with regard to pesticide monitoring, I mean, some of these, I don't know what is going on here, but some of them I actually, as a councillor, would like to know the results. I mean, so we say we're we are actively doing it. I'd actually like to know what the response is. Is there any way that we can be,
As I understand it.
Please
Alert when-
simply request if you see anything here, just send an email to us and we'll make sure you get a copy of the correspondence that goes out
so
to the.
when you finally fulfill it, we can
Yes.
just get a, yeah, okay.
Yep.
I understood
happy to
that
do
all
so.
of these things were put up on their website online.
Not the OIA Lagoima. I don't think so. No, not Lagoima responses.
Well, I think we should.
It could take quite a lot of web space, that's all, because in some cases there's, literally hundreds of pages of documents.
But the point about it is, if it's freedom of information, someone's asked a question, it should be just there, sit there, bang. So I'd like you to have a look at the IT people, and when they come back with your strategic vision for IT, with an overarching policy, et cetera, I'd like us to make sure that we have on the list there access to information, because having gone and spent all the effort of getting in there, it should then simply just go up to the site, and people should be able to search it for keywords and see if they find things here. So Councillor Balfour, when he's at night and looking for something interesting to read, and go through the little requests. Yeah, do your login. Right, can we move on to the items from business not on the
I
agenda?
just asked one, Mr Chair,
You
a question. Thank you.
Councillor Kirk, you have the floor.
Can staff just remind me if the question raised by Marty Sharp of the Dominion in regard to Napier City Council sewage discharge was an OIA request that we recorded here? Was that previously recorded?
No, Marty Sharp's request wasn't. The original request for information from Mr Marshall, upon which the his article was based, was registered as Lagoima, and Marty's question
Article
will
was
really
based
follow
on
up to that.
Oh, he
Yep.
followed it.
Yep.
All right, will someone move the council receives a report, follow-up items from the previous meetings? I'm looking for some, Councillor Bailey, Councillor Wilson. I'll put the question, all those in favour say aye, contrary no, carried. We now move on to the next item, 5, calls for items of business not on the agenda. Firstly, urgent items which are supported and tabled the CE, the chairperson's report in writing. Any urgent items? Minor items. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I have two. One is the tallow discharge,
Yep.
and the other is the pollution hotline.
Pollution hotline. Okay. Councillor
Marty Sharp article on outfall.
Outfall. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, let's move on then to item 6, Hawke's Bay Drinking Water Governance Joint Committee Terms of Reference. Who's going to lead this, Chief Executive?
Thank you, Chair. So we have now had the inaugural meeting of the Hawke's Bay Drinking Water Governance Joint Committee. Leading up to the establishment of the committee, there were a set of terms of reference which was previously considered by this council. When it went to other councils and to the board of the District Health Board, suggestions were made about how to refine and amend those terms of reference. All of those suggested amendments were considered by the Joint Committee at its meeting on the 24th of October. And the committee agreed to a consolidated new set of terms of reference, and this is now a part of the formal process to have this new and improved set of terms of reference endorsed by this council. I won't go through the changes in detail, but paragraphs 3.1 and 3.4 highlight the substantive changes. The only other thing I'd like to draw to your attention is the fact that the committee was asked to consider whether or not it would elect a chair from amongst its membership, or whether it wanted an independent chair. The committee did decide to go with an independent chair, and the question was put to Mr Chris Tremaine, who has been chairing the joint working group between the parties over the last 12 months, as to whether he would take up the role. He has indicated to me that he's not available to do so, and so we're now in a situation where we do need to find an independent chair for this committee. And so I would be very grateful for any nominations that any councillors have, either today or follow up by email at any stage, so we can put those into the hopper with the subcommittee, which has been delegated to find and appoint a independent chair.
Okay, before I go into questions, I'd just like to offer our councillors who were on part of this, Bailey and Belford, if they'd like to add any introduction to this before we go to questions. No? No?
Further,
Okay. Councillor Hewitt, questions?
No, so Garth has taken on an independent chairing role at the Hastings District Council, overseeing their infrastructure. Not this exercise at this point in time, although his name has been suggested, and he may be available for this exercise, I don't know.
Okay. Now, do we have any questions, comments before we go to the motion?
Questions, Mr Chair?
Questions, certainly, councillor.
Thank you,
Good.
Mr Chair. A couple of questions, if you don't mind. And I guess the Chief Executive will know the answers to these. One, there's a lack of financial information in this paper, and I'm curious to know what the estimated cost to this council and globally for the entire group will be. Secondly, I'm looking around for, I understand from the terms of reference that each council was responsible for their own costs. In that case, who pays for the independent chair? If you could answer those two questions, I have a follow-up from that.
The intention is the independent chair would be funded just pro rata between the each of the member groups, so we don't anticipate that to be a significant cost. The costs for supporting the committee are somewhat difficult to estimate at the moment, particularly as we await the final report of the Hablett North Drinking Water Inquiry. The recommendations of that inquiry and the extent to which they're taken up by central government will drive the work program for the committee in large measure, because we are expecting reform to take place. We currently have a relatively low level of activity as a council in the drinking water space.
Just to intervene, there are some direct costs of our representation being.
Yes.
This is a council, now it becomes a council committee.
Yes.
So can you tell me what the direct costs are for that, as opposed to the
Right. So
consequent costs after that?
The direct costs constitute the participation of our councillors, for whom there is no additional remuneration over and above their current councillor salaries proposed. So there is effectively no cost for us for having two councillors represent us there. We have agreed to be the administrating authority for it. This adds a little bit of additional time to our governance support team in terms of preparing papers and providing this room as a venue. Minor costs in the scheme of things, so we're not expecting any significant additional impost on this organisation.
I'd like to go to paragraph 3.5, which is in regard to the Māori representation, and I'm not clear what it means, not determine whether or not they wish to formally participate. Can you elucidate whether they do or they don't want to participate? And I'm unclear whether a position has been reserved for Māori representation, and if so, should that be recorded under 3.1?
So yes, a seat effectively has been made available. At the outset of this enterprise, there was a desire expressed by the then Mayor of Hastings, the Chairman of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and the Chairman of Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated, and indeed the Chairman of the DHB, and the chair of Ngāti Kahungunu is also the deputy chair of the DHB, that we do this collaboratively, including with tangata whenua. And so in the establishment of this committee, we checked back with Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated, and asked them whether they would still like to be involved in this. They said that they would like to reserve their position on this. They were not wishing to take the seat at this point in time, but they also didn't want the future opportunity to have a seat at the table to be precluded. So effectively there is a seat in reserve for tangata whenua representation. At the moment, the iwi Incorporation is the organisation with whom we have been liaising.
Could I then ask, though, that the wording in 3.5 essentially reflect that fact? It's very unclear to me what's intended by 3.5.
What is intended is, in the absence of formal representation being made, the committee will still seek to consult with and the member organisations of. Yep.
All right.
Well, they've not determined whether or not they wish to formally participate. Well, essentially what they've told us is that they don't want to participate yet, but they don't want to give up the opportunity to at some point in the future. Does that clarify for you, Councillor?
This is a term of reference, and for me, that is not clear. I think a very simple statement that a position is reserved for Māori representation would be a better way of presenting that.
The only issue here is that, could I just say to you, if we're going to make changes to this document, we have to go all the way around the circuit again. And why would we do that if we're not sure what...
I concede, Mr Chair.
That's very grateful if accepted, thank you. Can we now move to the... It seems to me that we've gone over all that. Can we now move to the recommendation? Councillor Bailey, would you move to second? Like to speak, Councillor Bailey? Councillor Belford?
No.
Any other speakers on
Yes,
the matter?
there are.
Councillor Kerr?
Yes, I'd like to take a brief opportunity, Mr Chair, given the restraint on questions that appeared earlier.
Point of order on myself. You conceded.
I just want to raise, and with staff, in regard to the overall goals of the purpose and goals of this working group, and I wouldn't like to see that those goals, or we default as an organisation to the working group. In other words, we've got in our regional resource management plan, we've got a significant section 4.5 from recall, to do with the relationships between councils in regard to consents. So what I'd be interested to know actually is what other parallel work is intended from council, and in fact are there intended to be any adjustments, changes to the RMP as a result of the Havelock North inquiry, and should we be thinking about that in terms of what this entity now intends to do? So if you like, making sure our plans coincide and are updated according to what the establishment of this group actually achieves.
Any further discussions? The mover, would you like to speak in closing?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
But you have to sum up the debate, introduce new material.
Summing up the debate, Chair, I think it's pretty clear that the purpose of the joint the Water Governance Joint Committee is merely to provide governance oversight to the Hawke's Bay Regional Drinking Water Government to the joint working group, in which are obviously bound by different plans and rules that they have to abide by in their separate jurisdictions. So I see very little conflict with our planning, our plans and whatnot that we as a council have to be conscious of.
Thank you. I'll put the question. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Abstentions?
Question, and I'm happy to second, just interested in the proxy, seal number. Just why is that so formal? How does that tie into this?
For
HBRC.
HBRC.
I don't recall. I don't know whether anyone else.
Well, we had a proxy for the meeting, but I'm just, first time in my memory, and that could be wrong, that I've seen this here.
I think we have seen it here from memory, and I think it is. Yeah. So.
So look, there's people who signed this that said that.
Still happy to second, Chair.
Yep.
I don't.
But excuse me, but the point is we've got the report here authored by Trudy and Jessica and Diane and James. So we've got the 4 wise heads here. They've all read this and signed it off, so I'd have thought you'd be able to tell us what the answer to the question is.
Well, I certainly signed the proxy for it, but the precise reasons why it needs to be presented here, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, other than the fact we're giving lawful authority on behalf of the council to exercise statutory rights, and so in the same way that we are giving authority around the conclusion of the.
He's got you had the answer.
Right.
You've
Okay.
got it.
Happy to second, Chair.
It's already seconded. You can't withdraw it.
We could have a stoush over that if you want.
All right. All those in favour would say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Item 8, report from the November 1 Regional Planning Committee. Who's going to lead us through this?
Looks like it may be me.
Yes, Liz, you've got a couple of some introductory comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, there are no formal decisions that require a resolution of council arising from the RPC. But the recommendations here note the reports that were provided to the Regional Planning Committee on the day. The first one was around policy options for addressing urgent Tukitoak Plan Change 6 implementation matters. That was potentially a decision-making item. However, as the resolution failed, there's no recommendation to council. And then the following two items, again, no resolution, although they were only information papers, because by that stage the quorum for the meeting had been lost. That was around the tank iwi engagement plan and an update on the terms of reference review process.
Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Dick.
Yes, 1.1. Well, in relation to all of them, the RPC is a committee of council. It does not have its own autonomy or final decision-making power. Its responsibility is to make recommendations to council, and council makes the final decision. So the problem with the 1.1 is that there is no recommendation, so the risk is that this important matter will simply disappear into the ether unless the council does something about it. Now, it would be within the power of the council to resolve on the recommendations in its own right and on its own, but I suspect that might not be the most politic thing to do. So, but it can't be left. We've got to do something with it, and there were very important issues that were there in front of that committee. So perhaps I'm asking you what ideas you might have to resolve this impasse.
Point of order, is that an accurate statement of the relative powers of the council versus the RPC?
We could come up with that. It's another question, but I think the question that's being asked by Councillor Dick is, if I put it this way, could this council ask the RPC to reconsider its decision?
Well, clearly that would be an option.
So I think that's what I got out of that, and I think this council could clearly do that.
Chair, if I may,
Chica.
the terms of reference that you were discussing earlier on, indeed I think even the existing terms of reference does have a a mechanism whereby if the council was not satisfied with a recommendation from the RPC, that it is duty bound to actually send it back. Now, here, in essence, you don't have a recommendation, but the silence on a matter put before could equally constitute something that you were dissatisfied with and you would like sent back. So I think it is consistent with the existing terms of reference and the spirit of the way in which we operate, that if you that you would like this referred back, that would be very much in line with the expected practice.
Well, I'd be prepared to move accordingly, that the matters in 1.1, with any further information that's relevant, be referred back to the Regional Planning Committee.
Could I ask if you would mind considering having that you use your motion to adopt the report, and that do it that way, so we would then adopt the report at the same time.
Sure.
Okay, seconded, Councillor Hewitt.
Mr Chair, I wonder whether Councillor Dick would consider referring 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 all back to the
Well, I got no problem with that, but yeah, 1.1's the vitally important thing for the council and for the community we serve.
The only thing I would say to you, I could just respond to Councillor Curtin, has been drawn to my attention helpfully, and I agree with the advice, is that the TANK and the update in the Regional Planning Committee terms were advisory information only. They weren't actually there for making decisions. And the other thing is, it would seem to me that if we have one matter which is really important to us, we should send only that back rather than the others. It diminishes, I think, diminishes the sort of the value of what we're doing here, in my view. So there's one issue of concern, let's send that back. All right, so we've got a resolution there. Is there any other comments that people would like to make before we move to discussion? Councillor Bailey.
Comments or discussion?
Well, there you go. Let's be helpful.
Thank you, Chair. I have to admit to being a little bit disappointed with some of the language that's been used around the decisions that have been made by the Regional Planning Committee, and almost as if to say that for some reason, because the Regional Planning Committee made a particular decision which disagreed with a point of view, that for some reason the Regional Planning Committee's failed. And that's why I don't particularly like the language that's been used in 1.1, where it discusses as a result of failed resolutions. The Regional Planning Committee, all they did was not support the recommendation put forward by staff. So, you know, to me, it's a language thing, because to me, the Regional Planning Committee did make two decisions. The decisions were to do nothing. So hardly a committee which is a real problem. So, but I do support. I think we're quite entitled to go back and ask for the Regional Planning Committee to reconsider the question. I just hope that we take a different approach when we do so. Otherwise, it'll just be doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, and that would be sad to see.
Well, a bit of I was looking more for questions, that sort of interim comments you've given us, so like a speech towards the motion there, and can I just come back to the formal page? Invite questions first, then I'll go back to the mover to speak to their resolution. Question, Councillor Belford.
Yeah, I would just repeat my former question, because it's pertinent to sending this matter back. Are we all clear in our understanding around the table here as to what actually the process is under the current terms of reference, as to where the final say actually gets made on any matter before the Regional Planning Committee?
Council.
Well,
I don't think that's
So
not what
perhaps-
I've been led to believe, Councillor, so I'd like it clarified.
Well, let's just come back to, I've got a view on that, but one of the people who were involved in drafting is Liz Lambert. So Liz, give us your view.
Thank you. So ultimately, the final decision does rest with council, but I accept that you could end up in a cycle of referral back and decision until somebody actually, you know, if you like, gives up or gives in. one of the issues that wasn't covered this morning in the workshop, but which I'd like to cover if I do get an opportunity to speak again, is around the terms of reference, is actually around what happens when a decision is not made, and that's part of the broader decision-making processes. But the short answer to your question, Councillor, is ultimately the council makes the decision, whether that's, you know, through giving up, giving in, or actually, you know, finally, you know, having positively agreeing to a recommendation.
Can I just seek clarity on that?
Can I just respond to answer the thing in my own terms to Councillor Belford before I come to you? To answer your question, Tom, the ultimate sign-off is with the council. No matter what resolution the RPC makes, it can go nowhere without the sign-off of the council. But the council is constrained insofar as that it can't sign off and make a decision on this matter until it has agreement with the RPC. But as you've seen as before, that if the RPC does not make a decision, this council in itself can then carry on and make a decision as we have done before. But the ultimate decision making resides here. Councillor Bevan.
So I was seeking clarity on that very matter. So if the RPC makes a decision that prevents a recommendation coming to us, but we pick up the same recommendation at this council and pass it, surely we're in contravention.
Depends what the matter is, I think.
I think there's two different pathways here. One is if there is a recommendation from the Regional Planning Committee and the council doesn't agree with it and wants to refer it back. But the other is, as in this situation, where there was no recommendation came through at all. So when the recommendations that were discussed by the Regional Planning Committee were lost, there was no. That was it. There was no further pathway for a recommendation.
Okay, so let's take specifically what we discussed and didn't get past, which was to delay the implementation of Plan Change 6. So we didn't get any recommendation that comes to this council about a delay in the implementation of parts of Plan Change 6. If we then sat here and said, right, well, we're going to agree to a 6-month delay in the implementation of Plan Change 6, surely we would be in contravention of something.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
If you initiated a plan change to do so, yes. All the preparatory work in the world you might want to do, you could be entitled to do so, and I don't think you'd be in contravention of the Act in terms of the letter, maybe the spirit, but not the letter. But the Act has its strongest provisions in relation to the progressing of plan changes or changes.
So in fact, our only recourse is to do what we're engaged in doing here, which is to put the matter back at the table of the RPC and ask for reconsideration of the matter. So it's an absolutely appropriate step.
And I think
for us
it's
to take.
important too to note that the policy options that were put to the committee were not just around, you know, let's write up a quick plan change. It was actually going out and talking with the stakeholders. It was finding out, you know, so there's a whole package of options, and so all of those will be back on the table for discussion.
Okay, so let's move on. I want Councillor Dick.
yeah, I'll just.
I want you to be able to speak to your motion now, please.
Pardon?
I want you to be able to speak to your motion now, please.
Speak.
To your motion.
Oh, righto, thank you. Okay, well, actually, what has gone wrong here is a process matter. And again, I put it down to, as I said before, it's teething problems. And if the RPC was of a mind not to accept those recommendations that from staff and subsequently developed by amendment and so on, then what they should have done is they should have passed a resolution that said that the committee recommends to council that it not accept the recommendations. Okay. Then our council today would have either adopted that, or it could have exercised its discretion to decide on the matter itself. So anyway, the proposal to send it back is the appropriate one. It is unlikely to offend anyone, and hopefully there'll be full discussion, full attendance. I'll get there somehow or another, and the matter will be resolved one way or the other.
Councillor Hewitt, seconder.
Thank you, Chair. I'm probably best to leave my debate until next week, but I'd like to thank the wise counsel from the far more politically inclined people than myself around the table here, and naming you, Chair, and Councillor Dick on my right. I think this is a good move. The frustration for the community of Central Hawke's Bay has been heard loud and clear around this table and around the RPC table. And while the timing is taking a lot longer than is desirable, I think this is a politically wise step to take it back. So thank you.
Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I too will support the motion. You will all recall when we discussed this at the RPC that there were several elements to the motion. One of them was to delay or propose looking into a plan change to delay the implementation of Plan Change 6. But there were also elements of it which involved consultation with the local Central Hawke's Bay community, and also to look at what powers we had under the plan change as it currently stands to manage the process better for the people of Central Hawke's Bay. So it's absolutely appropriate that we should refer it back and let's see what happens. But I think staff need to exercise some care with the construction of the paper we see, because if it's just the same paper as we had before, we'll get the same outcome. So we just need to take some care with it.
Any other speaker? Councillor Balfour.
I just want to be clear that I understand what we've been told here today, which is that this council can disregard a action taken by the Regional Planning Committee. If we don't like the outcome of the Regional Planning Committee, we can, as Councillor Dick said, say, tough new G's here, we're going to go ahead and do what we want to do. That's what we've been told here. Well,
You'd only do that in last resort, and we did that with
see, it's a last resort. Well, is it or is it not?
Yeah, it is.
So we can say to the Regional Planning Committee, sorry, we've heard everything you had to say about this issue, but we're exercising as a last resort our ultimate authority to say, piss off.
It's already been done once on the... yeah, but that's not the intention of the resolution. The intention of the resolution is to send it back to that organised
Point of order,
body.
Chair. Are we having a debate or not? Are we in debate or not?
Whoa. Let's see, we're getting into a debate here. Could this, Councillor Balfour, when you finish your presentation of your speaking division?
I just have a question.
Well, I just think, I'll just be clarify. I thought we'd answered it very clearly, but I'll come back to the Chief Executive to give you the answer again, so don't leave this part unclear.
One side of the table. I'm sorry, I hear one side of the table giving one answer and one side of the table giving the other answer, and you're pretending there's no difference.
I'm trying to tell you that there is a clear answer here, and the answer is, James, will you repeat it to me again?
The legislation states that the council must, they are the words, must refer all matters which relate to a regional policy statement or a change to a regional policy statement or regional plan, or a proposed regional policy statement or proposed regional plan, or a variation to a proposed regional policy statement or plan to the RPC. So we must refer it, and then the decision-making processes that sit within the legislation are such that if we don't agree, we can only refer back. So the legislation does not enable, but that is only in relation to a change to the RRMP or the RPS. Any other matter...
Including any other plan change
yeah. Yeah,
Because here
so,
the issue was changing the effective date of a plan
yes,
change.
so to actually do that, but that was not the decision that was debated at the last meeting. The decision at the last meeting was whether to go and get more advice and engage with the community on that.
And that's not what I'm asking.
So on a matter such as that, there is no problem at all with the council having a different view to the RPC in law. There might be in spirit, people might get upset about it, they might not think it's consistent with the kaupapa. but the legal constraint is in relation to changing the RRMP or changing the RPS.
If we refer this back. If we refer this back and we get the same outcome, could we at that point, as a council, say, okay, you guys had 2 cracks at it, but sorry, we're going to delay we, the council, are voting today to delay implementation of Plan Change
No.
6.
No, you cannot.
Was that clear before? This is the third time. The answer is absolutely clear.
That we
But-
cannot.
This is the third time this answer has been given, absolutely clear. To make a change to the plan, we can only do that with the agreement of the RPC.
So I want to
And we
make sure that
cannot do-
Councillor Dick
Can I just
understands
finish? Can I
that.
just finish? Only to the change of the RPC can we make a change to the plan. So in that regard, the RPC and the council have to agree. But anything which falls short of that or outside of that, there is a moral obligation to consult them, do them. But we are legally constrained on making a change to the plan. So we could not go and delay the plan for 6 months or 12 months, or take that without the RPC agreeing to it. Could not do it. So are we clear on that?
Yep.
Yep. Thank you.
I always have been.
Right, now, next speaker, I've got Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I've just about forgotten my argument after all that. Okay. I would like to just point out to my mind the decision we made around the WCO, and the WCO decision was not actually one that related to a plan change. So therefore, we were quite entitled, even though there was no recommendation from the Regional Planning Committee, we were quite entitled as a council to make that decision under law, and so I was comfortable with that. I would be extremely uncomfortable if we were to make, we can't make a decision about a plan change, so it has to go back. But I'm quite happy for us to take that question back to the Regional Planning Committee. But I think it's really important that we take cognizance of what was said around the table during the debate and the concerns that were raised by the members who voted against the recommendation, because if we go back with the same thing again, with the same story again, nothing will change, and it will be a continual circle. For me, what was the disappointing thing about that particular debate is that there were 2 members who voted against the proposal who I had no idea why they voted against the proposal, because they never said. To me, that's not proper consensus decision making. If we're making a decision by consensus, we should all be conscious of why people especially are going to be voting against the proposal, so that we can understand what's going on. That was what disappointed me about that process more than anything else. So I hope that when the proposal goes back to be reconsidered by the RPC, that a slightly different approach is made in terms of the way we look at the question, the way we approach the question, so that we get the answer that for the benefit of the community.
Councillor Dick, sum up. I'll put the resolution. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Environment and Services Committee, Councillor Balfour, would you like to lead us off on this, please? You don't need it.
I think all of these were informational. I'm sorry, no, we did have to actually adopt the pest management proposal so that officially go into public consultation. I don't recall there being any substantial issues raised about that.
Microphone, please.
On 1.1, I don't think there were any issues raised with regard to that. It is simply to put the pest management plan into consultation, so we had to officially decide to do that. We did so. The plantation forestry matter raised the issue that it would put a substantial staffing burden on us for implementing that, monitoring and so forth. I think actually 3-4 full-time employees were mentioned as the cost to us of implementing the standard, but there was no substantive issue raised there. the climate change paper, which I hope folks have had a chance to dig into a bit. There are three things I'd say about that. One is that the paper did identify nicely quite a wide range of activities the council already is involved in that have a bearing on our climate, on either adapting to or mitigating climate change. That was good. It also made a case as to how readily, if it wished, the council could move the region to a carbon neutral status, which was good news. And it also laid out a scheme whereby appropriate initiatives in the forestry arena could generate a significant revenue flow to the council as well as environmental benefits. So all in all, I think a pretty important paper and important subjects raised in it. And the last three items were all fairly routine reporting items. I'm sorry, I should say 1.5. The resource, innocuously called resource use annual report, was actually our first report, annual report on compliance issues, and various comments were made about ways that could be improved in the future. Councillor Curtin had some suggestions in particular about that, and but all in all, I think the group felt that it was a great first step and to be applauded and to be improved further. That is all I would say.
Thank you. Before anybody has any questions of Councillor Belford, I'd just like to make the observation that you made a very pertinent point at the meeting, which I thought was well put, was that the report on climate change, you made the observation that being carbon neutral as a region is clearly within our grasp, and we should understand this and drive forward to it. I thought it was really put that extremely well.
And you've reminded me, Councillor, that I think the outcome of that discussion was that the staff was asked to sort of get its arms around what was quite a laundry list of conceivable things we could be doing in this space, and we needed to see some prioritization of what comes first and how to actually begin to get some of those recommendations acted upon. So.
And on that, Chair, we will be providing a report to the council on the 11th of December in that regard.
Look forward to it. Right, questions? Councillor Bevan. That's not a question, it's a statement, but I'll take it. We'll do a seconder. Councillor Wilson. Would you like to speak, Councillor Bevan? Councillor Wilson. Councillor Balfour, do you like to speak? All right. I'll put the question. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Item 10. Now, could I just, as the chair, say that we have had a discussion about this before. I just want to repeat it. That every paper that comes to this council should go to a committee for discussion and not come directly to the council table. I would normally get a bit more grumpy about this, but I think it's a much better place for it to be so we can have the discussion there and it comes up sometime later. But I'm going to let that slide, but I just hope that this is the last of these. Except that there'll be probably time constraints, but let's just box on with that. So who's going to give us the introduction to this?
Chair, Mr. Leckie and Mr. Mitchell.
Mr. Leckie and Mr. Mitchell, will you present yourselves to the committee? Sign in and lead us through this, please.
So firstly, to the committee and the chair, my personal apologies for that. And in a decade, that's the only time it's happened in terms of the process, and it won't happen again. But what I'd like to do, so the Biosecurity annual reports really sum up quite a busy year for the Biosecurity team. What I normally do, and what I'll do again today, is I won't go through the actual entire report in page by page, but what I'll do is I'll talk about some highlights and then happy to take questions on any aspect of it as well. Look, there's a couple of things I just wanted to note very briefly in the detail before we get into the sort of the discussion on it, and that is just a couple of minor amendments. So on page 3, where it talks about Phragmites, it talks about we've been involved with this particular program for 88 years. It's much closer to 8 years than closer to 100. So it's 8 years. And the other, page 19, actually, there's a little issue which cropped up in our graphing, and that is that the graph on the rabbit monitoring automatically assigned a 0 for a year which was skipped. So there was no monitoring done, but the graph automatically assigned a 0, and that slipped past the team. So when you're looking at that particular graph on page 19 and the monitoring for night counts, it's not because we have no rabbits suddenly last year, it's simply that we missed that particular point. Anyway, look, so I'd just like to briefly talk about some of our programs. In essence, we've got some quite significant flagship programs in the region. One's our Possum Control Area program. It's been going now for 17 years, and it's been quite a significant investment from Council. And it's acknowledged, it's now roughly 700,000 hectares, and it's acknowledged as probably one of our most successful vertebrate pest management investments, not just here in this region, but actually across New Zealand. That's now providing the potential springboard for a transition through to predator control at a larger scale, should we choose to believe that's worth investing in. And that program's ongoing and has, generally speaking, very strong support. Because it's been going for so long, though, there are some issues starting to come through in terms of people or farmers looking at the low number of possums and deciding perhaps there's no need to invest in control. And this issue's been discussed. It was discussed very briefly at the Environment and Services Committee around the Regional Pest Plan, and it's been discussed with the Biosecurity Working Party around the Regional Pest Plan, just in terms of the need to focus a bit more around monitoring and investment into resources like that. Our rook control program, as you go through the report, you'll see that actually that's trending in the right direction. So we've actually, over the last decade, made quite a significant difference across the total number of rooks in the region. Probably the thing to watch on this in the next 3 to 5 years is that in reality we were at now with the numbers. In many cases you're going to see it bounce around a bit. So the actual trend going down should still continue, but it might bounce around from year to year. And the reason for that is quite simple. We've got 2 zones, one eradication zone which is north of State Highway 5 and one which is south of State Highway 5. Rooks cross over that zone, that artificial line we've drawn, and so you might, for example, see rookeries go up in the eradication zone potentially, and that might be the reason why. Because numbers are now so low, any change like that will be quite noticeable in what we pick up. So the other areas which are in here, in terms of we've had some significant success over time, particularly with Pinus contorta out at Rangataiki. Some areas we're working on there, we've actually managed to get rid of a core area of 90 hectares of Pinus contorta. And in context, that's actually quite significant in terms of that 90 hectares seeding across the environment. Removing that is removing quite a significant risk, from that particular plant pest species. Urban programs are going well. They continue to go well. They're a relatively small investment. But the actual recovery of bird life, particularly noticeably in our monitoring bellbirds and tuis within the urban areas, is significant. That's 300 to 400% increase. And so, you can often be sitting here in this office now or walking out through that particular thing and you can hear bellbirds calling, which wasn't the case a decade ago. So look, I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take questions on any aspect of the report.
Okay. Questions? Councillor Dick?
I don't quite know how to phrase this as a question, as a compliment more. That brochure that you've prepared is extremely good. It was far easier to read than this report.
Thank you.
I'm sure compliments are well received. Any other questions? Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your report. I I just want to ask you a question. There's one of the strategic objectives, and this appears on page 39 at the bottom 39 as opposed to any other page number, bottom right-hand corner. Possum control areas, a strategic objective by 30th of June 2016 will have PCM over 900,000 hectare. How many hectares are you operating over?
So the possum control program itself is just a fraction over 700,000 hectares. And then when you combine the possum control being done by Osprey TB Free New Zealand, that's around about 250,000 hectares. So the total is around about 950,000 hectares.
That is actually being...
That is under sustained control now by either us or them.
It's an extraordinary result, I would have commented on, if our media people can pick up on the investment over a long period of time for that. The other question I have, Mr. Chair, with your agreement, I'd just like to take you back actually to the control of restricted plants, and well, we could choose page 35 onwards through. You may have seen earlier in today's agenda a question, an OIA question in regard to plant pesticides, insecticide use, pesticide use, question raised in terms of any residual in waterways, etc. Can you say in the control operations, what materials are used in your control operations, and do you measure any outcomes for the use of those chemicals?
So I think the first answer to the question around what sort of pesticides do we use for plant pest operations is a range of them, but there's the effectively the tordons and the gutaprimes and those sorts of things. So there's a range of standard use pesticides which are available on the shelf on the market, and they're used according to the label directions. The question around outcomes, I'm a little unsure whether you mean in that context, do we measure the outcomes of in terms of for plant pest control, for example, or are there other outcomes around health which we measure in relation to pesticides use?
Or do we measure anything?
So we absolutely measure we don't measure the health-related outcomes because we don't see that as our role if we're using these things legally into label use. But we do measure outcomes around the plant pests, and that's particularly around for our biodiversity species, whether or not in those areas we're undertaking site-specific control, there's a recovery of that particular, the plants in that area that we're trying to protect from the pests.
And finally, Mr. Chair, do you anticipate any review of the chemicals that are used for weed and pest control?
The short answer to that is I think we are seeing a significant trend in society where there is increasing concern around any sort of pesticide use for plant or animal control or anything else. And you've seen that coming through in the, internationally as well. So I think it's likely that we will see those sorts of reviews take place as the scrutiny increases. Yep.
So the QE2 agreement, does that go across to the sister fund, Ngāwhenua?
So not under the regional pest management plan, it doesn't, because it doesn't specifically mention it. But we've had this conversation, not necessarily here before, but we've had that conversation with Ngāwhenua. There are Ngāwhenua sites that we support for possum control in a very similar way to as we've got in our QE2s. Yep, just not all of them automatically. Depends on Ngāwhenua coming to us and our ability to fund it. Yep.
But you do fund 100% of the QE2 ones?
Where they meet that criterion size. So 20 hectares and lower, they get some baits and materials, and above a certain hectares, they can get up to 100%, yes. Yep.
Councillor Balfour.
You made a comment in response to Councillor Curtin about not our responsibility to monitor, measure health impacts of our pesticide chemical use, whose responsibility would that be?
So that might depend a little on the context of the actual pesticide. So, for example, in relation to things like residual chemicals, anticoagulants in game animals, that would, for example, I expect be MPI. In relation to human health related things, I would assume that that would be the DHB's responsibility, although I'm not a specialist in that area and I stand to be corrected.
Yeah, and maybe I shouldn't be directing this at you, but my understanding is we monitor water quality, not the DHB, and they rely on our monitoring to determine whether there's a health concern or not. Is that not the case?
So we do pesticide monitoring in groundwater across the region, so at representative sites, and we've got part of a national program to do that across the whole range.
So if there were a community concern arising about our use of chemicals, various kinds, it would be our responsibility to either say, well, we're already doing that, thank you, or initiate that type of monitoring.
Well, certainly what we do relates to groundwater, because obviously that's where you get accumulation and where the principal municipal drinking water suppliers come from. Surface water is a bit more difficult because, as you can imagine, it's pretty fast moving, and from when a chemical might be applied proximal to a water body and then end up in a water body somewhere between there and the sea, and our ability to pick that up would require continuous sampling, which is expensive enough to do around E. coli for drinking, for bathing sites, as you know, let alone trying to do that on any sort of representative basis. So I don't think it's actually practical for it to be done on surface water bodies. The accumulation does occur in groundwater. In terms of soils, there is a surveillance program, and I'm not clear about how much we're involved relative to the Ministry for the Environment and Ministry for Primary Industries, but there is a national soils pesticide residue program as well, and as Campbell mentioned, the Ministry for Primary Industries, through their food safety responsibilities, do a regular survey of the accumulation of various pesticides in the food chain, if you like. So there is a sort of a national surveillance program around that.
Short of all of that, if someone were to file a Lagoima request simply asking the regional council what its use of chemicals, pesticides, et cetera, in the landscape were, we would be able to produce such a inventory.
Yep, I believe so. Yeah, absolutely. It's all recorded in our requirements under health and safety legislation, and also hazardous substances legislation, as such that we do keep registers of all of that, including where it's used and in what volumes, etc.
Can I just follow up on Councillor Balfour's question, because it's a really interesting one, in that we are monitoring for things which we targets. For example, pesticides. But pesticides are different from poisons. And what I saw Councillor Balfour was arguing was, if we're measuring for these things but not for health issues, who is measuring for health issues and how they're doing it? So you've answered this in part, which is that we do soil water sampling for which we measure toxicology, etc., and that informs the DHB. But are we, what I thought from Councillor Belford's, Belford, is that are we missing something here? So the scan of the horizon. So are we missing something here, notwithstanding all the problems? And I know that it's not Campbell's issue to answer, but who would we approach to see, do we have sufficient scanning of the environment? For example, Fenton's lot go and put some 1080 all over the place. Who's monitoring to see whether this is in the waterways? I know you tell us it doesn't, but who is?
So just quickly on that, I think it's very much dependent on the context you're talking about in. So as CE talked about the context there, and then there's a context around 1080, for example, where there are effectively consent requirements from the DHB who you approach and doing a 1080 operation to have water quality monitoring done. We do, for example, ask for people to get, or will ask for people to get certificates around impacts of privet potentially in the future if we change the regional pest plan. So we do have a role clearly a role around environmental monitoring, but not in every case is it us who delivers that monitoring. Yep.
Okay. Just to follow up, maybe Peter might be able to answer this. Let's say in the pip fruit industry, everybody who's applying anything has to keep pretty meticulous records of all that, right? And so in that industry, this sort of information exists and is readily at hand, and all I'm saying is, as another actor in that, in the arena here affecting our landscape in Hawke's Bay, do we have the same kind of information as to what our chemical impact is on the landscape? And if we don't, I think we should.
So I can tell you, everybody that's registered for Global Gap, which is all pip fruit growers and some fruit exporters and kiwi fruit growers and so forth, all of them have to keep a spray diary. So there's a record of what they put on, how much they put on, where they put on, and the date they put it on for every chemical they use during the season.
So look, we do the equivalent of that in terms of that was the record keeping I was referring to before. The benefit, I guess, that the pip fruit industry has over and above that is that you have product sampling of residue levels, and in a wider environmental context beyond doing groundwater resources, soil sampling, which we do, and we know where our contaminated sites are, etc. There is sort of no other obvious. I mean, what would you sample? I mean, we could design programs to sample downstream of our drains, for example, that we spray for flood control, and see what effects that's going. I mean, we don't have a science program around that at the moment.
I think, Mr. Chair, I think this does, the point for me raising this issue is clearly coming down the pipeline, so excuse the pun, is a significant piece of public interest in this area. You'll see it increase, and the suggestion you just made is if, for example, we're doing a couple of kilometres of glyphosate spraying down Taipo stream, we may wish to introduce a sampling or monitoring program. I'm not suggesting right across the board, when obviously there are discrete interventions on a small scale, well, obviously not, but there may be where we're doing significant coverage, we may seek to have that sort of intervention.
Just page 51, Chair, biodiversity projects, just a question through you in regard to, I'm just interested why Whangawehi wasn't there. Are we doing any pest control in that catchment? It would have been quite good to see actually how big the area was. So that was my main interest, but I see we're doing work adjacent on Anui, etc., but there was just no specific reference to Whangawehi as a project, which, to be fair, is one of our leading projects. So.
Yep, we'll take
Happy to remove the report, Mr. Chair.
Right, Councillor Kirson's moving the report. Do I have a second then? Councillor Day. Councillor Kirsten, would you like to say?
Just very briefly, Mr. Chair, and Campbell, congratulations on your part of the world delivering pretty sound results, or very good results right across the board for both plant and animal pest management. Clearly there's some challenges coming your way, but one of the things that I think I was particularly pleased with in this report was the reference to biodiversity, and I appreciate your involvement in it, but I appreciate that your part of our particular activities and operations is cognizant of what's happening in other areas, and I'd like to see greater, if you like, involvement and collaboration across parts of the organisation that will produce a better result for us. So I'm seeing pest management, etc., being a vital part of biodiversity.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the report, Campbell, and I'm pleased to hear you say that you're cognizant of the rising of public awareness around the use of pesticides and herbicides, and you've got that in your back of your mind, because I think that's the next. If I was looking to the future and looking into my crystal ball and crystal ball grazing, that would be, I think, the next big issue that people are going to cotton on to. So best to be ahead of the game than being follower.
Any other comments? I just make one comment that falls off this, but it's just a be careful thing. I see we mentioned here Didimo. Didimo is a problem, particularly in the South Island, And just recently I went to the South Island, and as part of that I went whitebaiting. And when I got to the ferry in the car, I was approached by a man who asked me if I had any fishing gear. Well, I said, well, not really fishing gear, but anyway, then suddenly, why is that? I thought about boat. I don't. Anyway, I said to him, well, I've got a whitebait net because I've been fishing in the Grey River. He said, oh, he said, you might have a problem with Didymo. I said, but the Grey River doesn't have any Didymo. He said, every South Island river is at risk. And you cannot put in the water in the North Island, which has been in the water in the South Island. And I regard myself as a pretty careful person, but I brought home a whitebait net, and I was thinking about myself maybe going and having a dip in the tuki. Well, I recoil in shock at this. So the point I want to make is that even when we think we're really being careful, we need to rethink and recheck, because, as I say, I regarded myself as a pretty careful person, but I never connected my whitebait net in the back of the car to fishing in the Grey River to doing something else with it. So it's just a salutary warning to us all. And I was really impressed with the fact that they had someone going up and down the line of cars. Not only that, told me how to do it and gave me some chemicals, which has been done. But that's something we need to be really careful about, biosecurity.
I recoil in shock at the notion that you might be competing with me in my river.
With a contaminated net. Uncontaminated now.
Mr Chair, can I remind me that last year you promised me that you'd give me some whitebait and you haven't done it yet?
Do as flagship for this council.
All those in favour of the report, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Carried. And I'd echo the comments of Councillor Dick. Well done. Thank you. Right. Now let's move on to item 11. Who's leading us through this? Are you Chief Executive?
Yes, Chair. We'll just happily take questions on any of the items.
Any questions? Going around the table. Councillor Dick. Councillor Hewitt. Sorry? Councillor Bailey. Councillor Bevan. Councillor Wilson.
Yes and no. There's no one here to answer my question.
Well, try us.
I don't want you answering it, Chair. I want someone else.
Well, that's it. Councillor Belford.
I'm just hoping for a little bit of feel for how the WCO hearing process is being done, but sometimes it's really good hearings. But Tom, you've been giving us your reports, any surprises?
No surprises, Councillor. I am giving a verbal update to the RPC next week, but the regional council's part of the its evidence for the first stage of the hearing for the Upper Ngātaroto was heard last Thursday or Thursday week ago. Yeah, and I think the advice from our solicitor, he felt that the questions were very probing from the panel. They were probably a step up from some of the questions the panel had been asking other people, and he felt that was a good sign, that they felt that they really wanted to get into the evidence that we'd put up. The hearing concludes next week for the first part.
Councillor Curtin.
Just one question in regard to
Microphone, please.
Apologies. One question in regard to biosecurity. Or
What page?
This is on page 65.
65.
Top of page 65. In
Yep.
fact, it's biodiversity. I'm referring to appointment of a biodiversity implementation plan project manager. Now, I'm just trying to recall our funding in the current year for that and how that's transacting, whether in fact that person is engaged by the trust or by council. Where did we land with the engagement of that person?
Yeah, look, Jess is just reminding me, fixed term contract for this until the trust is fully set. The trust is going to have its first meeting shortly. The idea was that we were going to employ somebody to assist the trust in getting up and running and building the funding base for it, but with the view that longer term they would migrate across. And the funding for this has come in part out of the hotspot funding as well as some reprioritisation from memory.
Mr. Mohi?
Just in terms of the water conservation order, to remind members that Dr. Marker came off the Regional Planning Committee just to go on that. He anticipated at the time that it wouldn't take as long as it was, but because it's been split into two parts, it's going to take a lot longer. So he's informed the He Tōtaki Tini that he's still to the side and that they need to get a replacement, temporary replacement for him.
All right, back to Councillor Hewitt. Would you like a question?
Yes, in terms of resource consents, and James, I'm just wondering about any processing of or pending applications for the Tranche 2 water. And I ask, based on a number of concerns that are coming up on our regular water user meetings in Central Hawke's Bay, and you know, like, so one of the downstream farmers, for instance, is putting in a dam, and at considerable expense to himself, but he's very, very worried about the impact of Tranche 2, which is unknown, on his considerable expense as a result of being taken up, well, the surface water flows troubles. Other people that are losing their surface water takes or having them constrained are going under severe pressure as well, and working through their options as fast as they can, obviously looking for a bit of breathing space there, but they were wondering what's happening with that Tranche 2. A lot of them saw it as a potential sharing solution for them.
We've got, we had Tranche 2 applications in by HBRC for 10 million. That's now been surrendered or withdrawn. We had quite a few people backed up behind that, basically saying they were happy to wait for the HBRC part to be processed. So now that that's gone, we've actually got 17 million cubic metres of water applied for out of the 15 million that's available. And basically we would run that on a first in, first served basis. We're just starting now to action them a lot. We're on hold at their request. Basically they all were. We do need further information from them, so we're just starting to send that information request back out to advise them what else we need. We have it in mind to actually get them all together and have a meeting in Central Hawke's Bay at some point shortly. Don't know when, we haven't set a date, just to sort of get everyone sort of understanding what we're asking and whether there's, if we're asking for common information, do they want to actually pool resources to get that information, for example?
So when you have that meeting, would you consider including the surface water takers? Because there's a perception that maybe if you go under a sharing model or something a little bit like what Twyford has done, then you could be potentially working out a way to utilise that water for people who are going under severe consent restrictions. So could that discussion be a little wider in the affected community?
Could be, but
how constrained are you by that first in, first served, as opposed to the greater good?
Probably reasonably constrained, but if we had that conversation, that might change views. But basically, the people who are in the queue are basically entitled to assert that they should be processed first and in the manner that they've applied. And no one's really applied to augment or facilitate flows to the advantage of others. They're generally wanting water and acknowledging that there's a requirement in the plan that they should augment or offset the effect that they're having on the river. And that's sort of the scale of what we've seen lodged. If the conversation's to widen, we'd have to sort of persuade them to see that it could be perhaps managed in a different way.
Just so the councillors are aware, these are some of the discussions that are starting to happen in terms of, you know, there is nobody sitting around there just waiting, but they're going to take time to work these things out. So I'm flagging that there are discussions going on and solutions. We're looking for solutions, but maybe when that meeting's had, you might widen at least either that, or I'll go back and say to them, or look, we'll get your Tranche 2 applications in, and then you'll be invited to the meeting. It's easier if they were some of the parties are
some of those possibly are surface water takers as well.
That's true.
Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, afternoon, Malcolm. I'm just interested to know, with the Tranche 2 water applications, can you give us a flavour for the methods that the applicants are going to use to substitute the flow at the surface?
Well, principally they're taking groundwater and taking additional groundwater and putting it to the river. So the only source.
So they only have to substitute a percentage of what they take.
Yeah, they've basically got to offset the effect on the stream, which we haven't really fully determined what that would be, and they haven't determined what that is. But basically they've got to offset their effect. So if they're drawing water and having a nominally a 20% effect on the river, they should be putting another 20% in the river.
Yep, so they're the sort of numbers we might be looking at in Hiratonga. Do we have any science to support what it needs to be down there?
In Ruataniwha? Yeah. There is certainly there's a groundwater model, but I think there's as many questions as there are answers in relation to this at this stage. There's delays in terms of how responsive it will be. That degree of effect is not really understood. Perhaps the other thing is just in taking the water to augment, if they take 20% to augment, they've actually then got to consider what the effect of taking that 20% is further on the system. Yeah.
Chair, just supplementary to that, can I just remind councillors that Tranche 2 water was not something that was proposed by the Regional Council. There was no evidence before the Board of Inquiry in support of Tranche 2 water. It was something that the Board of Inquiry themselves invented. It creates significant implementation issues with which we're only just beginning to grapple with. The solution to Tranche 2's complexities effectively was stored water, so this was less of an issue when the RWSS was in play, and the Tranche 2 water was essentially going to be used by the scheme using stored water to do the in-stream supplementation and therefore balance things out. That gave us options that we don't have, as we don't have stored water above ground.
I want to go to Paul Bailey now. He has a question.
Thank you, Chair. It's kind of a question, Malcolm, but maybe more of a statement. But following on what from James is saying there, and your previous comment, it seems to me like there is no certainty about whether the effects of taking the Tranche 2 water is going to have a minor or otherwise effect on in-stream flows. So that kind of begs the question as to why we would be treating Tranche 2 water any differently than, say, we have any further consents to be taking water from the Hiratonga aquifer. I'm really concerned that we may or may not be approving, or we may be approving water consents, water takes from the Tranche 2 water, which is only going to exacerbate and make things worse in terms of being able to meet the minimum flow requirements in the Toki and Waipawa. I mean, I would dearly love to see some sort of report from staff about how that particular issue is going to be dealt with, because I think, I don't think we've received anything of any great consequence about that. So I can understand what's going on, unless I'm mistaken. There's been something that I've missed.
I just remind you, the starting principle of a resource consent application is that the applicant themselves have got to provide the assessment of environmental effects. So the onus, if you like, is on the applicants to demonstrate what the effect is and how they're going to mitigate it. So that's not our responsibility at this point in time. So we're a little bit early at this point to draw any conclusions about the consentability. There is a provision in the plan notionally to allocate 15 million cubic metres under Tranche 2. However, we've yet to receive detailed AEs, I think, from anybody, and the science to support all that. So this is early discussions, and it may well be that the water is unallocable based on the effects not being able to be adequately mitigated. That's just something that we've yet to work through.
I want to go to...
Or just a follow-up statement from the question from that, then, or statement from that, Chair?
Follow-up statement or follow-up question?
Statement. I'll do it now, or debate, one or the other.
Where you go.
It was just that what I am concerned about is that we don't want to be, to me, we don't want to be raising the hopes of the people down in Central Hawke's Bay unreasonably. I think we want to be quite open and honest about the challenges that are going to confront us over this tranche 2 water. I think we should be straight up and down about it, and so that the people down there are aware that we've got a real challenge with it, and that just because it's there doesn't necessarily mean that applications they on a first come first served basis will actually be approved. That's the point I want to make from that, and make that quite clear.
All right, Councillor Belford.
It's an interesting conversation. I have a slightly different view on it. As someone who sat on both stakeholder groups for the Tukey and now the tank group, the level of science backing for the decisions being made in the tank situation are immeasurably greater than anything that happened in the Tukey case. And the fact of the matter is the science on the tank side of things is raising questions about the impact of aquifer takes on surface flows to the point where we're now being told that things like stage reduction and band days and so forth are pretty irrelevant in terms of managing surface water flows. If one were to, and I recognize catchments can be different, but on the one hand, we're seeing a large body of evidence that is saying these two things are very difficult to relate in a way that might actually stand up to rigorous review in a legal setting. On the other hand, we're pretty much flying blind in terms of what these relationships are in the Ruatanifa situation. And, you know, it's, from my standpoint, just one more example of, you know, we had a process designed to yield an outcome in the first case, and did a pretty shoddy job of supporting it with adequate science. And now it's biting us in the butt. We might find out that the 15 million is totally releasable because nobody can document what its actual surface water effect would be. That's how far I think we are behind the curve in that whole matter.
Point of order, Chair, just for the record, that wasn't our shoddy process, it was an EPA process.
Councillor, can I just quickly respond? Just note that this morning in your LTP workshop, staff put forward in the non-discretionary category as urgent for next year as capital investment to rebuild the Ruatanifa groundwater model, because we recognise that we've got some catch-up to do on the science. The old work's now, you know, effectively 5 years old. The issue we've got is we've got a plan that's operative, that's based on the Board of Inquiry's decisions, and until we get the science done to update it and then go through a plan change, we're stuck in a difficult position. But I think, as Councillor Bailey's pointed out, there is a precedent with respect to what we've done in the Hiratonga zone, where we've got science that gives us reason to pause in terms of further allocation. Whether we've got enough science to justify that at this point in time is something we're going to have to look into.
Just to, we had a good hash of this. Can I just sum up to say, I think we've all got some pretty significant concerns about tranche 2 water. And if I can put it simply in my head, we had our best advice here was that the Ruatanifa Basin was like a bucket. Bathtub was it. And it's going to take a lot of people, we're going to take a very hard line to convince me that if I pull out, for example, 100 litres of water, tranche 2 water out, and someone says you have a 20% effect on the ground surface water, so I put 20 litres of that back into the surface water, leaving with 80 free, and I can do this continuously over and over again and have no effect on the surface water. Well, logic doesn't give me that. This is a really serious issue here. So we're going to have to come to grips with it sometime shortly.
So just one other thing. You said before that the onus is upon the applicants to demonstrate the science, but you're also telling us we're spending money in our plan doing the science. So whose responsibility is it, and are they going to be paying
So
Or
effective,
what arrangement has been made?
so we do science for planning purposes, and then in an ideal world, the plan is then based on the science, and then people at the micro level need to respond with their science for the AEE. Obviously, when we receive an assessment of environmental effects, we have to measure that against our own internal science view, and it may be that we procure additional science to peer review that. But I'm just saying, in the first instance, the onus is on the applicant to demonstrate the assessment of effect and how it's going to be managed. Well, it's a capital item. I can see what the insurance, interest costs are. I'm guessing we've got a couple $100,000 there in year one. I haven't got in fact it might be on the additional pages. This one.
I'm happy to move, Chair.
All right, seconder. Councillor Balfour, right. I think we had a good discussion, haven't we?
Yep.
Sorry.
I'll call the question. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried.
200,000. Yep.
Right. Chairman's report. Some of you might have missed it. I could have come up to Macquarie and sent out every day for you, but I did find Kiwi. And the one that I think Sue highlighted where he's really interested.
Microphone.
When we met with Tuhoe, we got a better reception than we had before, really warm and engaging. Excellent. Fenton was there. They made it very clear to us that they wanted to build and strengthen the relationship they have with the regional council, and they were much more open to us and to making connections and doing things in the science area and cooperation and so on. So, big step forward. We asked them directly the question about their attendance at the RPC, and they said that very clearly that they were not. Only message you get from it. Their view is that for them to participate in an entity which is making decisions about someone else's mana whenua was wrong. Very wrong. Their words were even stronger than that. And they thought that the model was flawed from the beginning. They argued for a different model, but lost the argument. The seat they've left there in case they wish to turn up. So we left it on the basis that the seat is left there for them. There's an open invitation. Should they wish to turn up, they're most welcome. But if they don't turn up, we won't take offence at it. And we're happy about that. We'll move along and we'll just have a direct personal relationship with them. Interestingly, I met with Mana Ahuriri and had a very similar response from them. Their view is that they would prefer to have a strong, direct relationship with the council on issues which affect them, and their participation in the RPC is something that they're pondering the value of. So this is where it's, there's a few things moving here. The last thing I'd highlight is on with Shane Jones came here. This was an enormous amount of time spent on this. A great opportunity, but we got advised, I think on Friday one week, that he was coming into Gisborne and going down to Wairoa, asking us all to go to Wairoa to meet him, and then we'd go back to Gisborne. In consultation with his office, I managed to get them to persuade them that there were flights into Napier, wanted to come to Napier. So we got them to come to Napier, have the meeting with here, give him the opportunity to go and see what we're doing, and then we took him to by helicopter across the area so he could see firsthand, to get to Wairoa, because that's where he had to be for a meeting with the people up there to make an announcement, and had to then be in Gisborne that night at 4 o'clock, which we achieved. It was a really good initiative. He was very impressed with the quality of the regional council's leadership in these areas. He was very impressed with the clear view we had of what needed to be done, and our willingness and ability to go and do it. He was impressed with the fact that we had good relationships with iwi. He was very impressed with the quality of science we had, and he looked forward to working with us. So, it was, in my view, quite a very successful visit. There were some criticisms of the visit by some, but I just had to say to them, well, it was organised in such a hurry. Not only were we rung on Friday for a meeting on Thursday, we got rung on Monday to tell us what was coming on Wednesday. I never knew politicians were this difficult to deal with. But anyway, I thought it went really well. And so I'm happy to answer any questions on the report. as you'd expect, there'll be many other side meetings with CE and Rex. I've seen him and talked to him over the time he's been away. Yeah, and I'd move my report, but I'd like to put another amendment to it if you will agree. Report and authorise the Chair and Deputy Chair and Chief Executive to explore with Ngāti Kahungunu and the government agencies the options for advancing the tree planting program. They want to get on with the job, and I thought we should be just up front. We need to continue to talk to them. And obviously, if there's something that comes as concrete out of it, we come back and report to you and tell you what we're doing. But I think we need a mandate to go off and explore that so people are clear about what we're doing and there's no ambiguity about this. I see this as quite a significant opportunity. There's a lot of desire within the government to get on and do this. Yep, just go and explore that. Yep. Second? Yep, good. We'll come back and report to you what we get. Okay.
You taking questions, Chair?
Sorry, any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, just around the Shane Jones visit, I was very thankful to have an invite from the Wairoa District Council. As it turned out, I couldn't make it, but just wondered what the rationale was when it was a multi-agency and quite a large collection of folk, in my understanding, meeting with Shane Jones, that councillors weren't invited. Is there any reason for that?
Well, there was just the speed of being able to do it. We had, if we invited councillors, we would have had the Central Hawke's Bay Council, the Hastings Council, the Napier Council, the Wairoa Council, and it was just the numbers. We said to his office, how many do you want? And they thought, you know, a reasonable number of people, reasonably compact, but you know, a broad section, a cross section as well. So it was then mayors and CEs, and you know, some people from HBRC, etc., etc. And so it was that the invitation list was done in conjunction with his office because it's his visit.
So just follow up.
The one in Wairoa was left entirely to Wairoa.
And I was very thankful for the nod.
Yeah, but I rang
Locally,
the
but
mayor
not
of
regionally.
Wairoa and said they're on the way, gave him the phone numbers to ring up to what they want, and so he contacted them directly and organised that. He was very happy with that.
Just a follow-up question, Chair. The water storage discussion, what was that in Noda? What was that about?
He indicated that this is informally, that the big schemes like Ruataniwha were off the agenda, but the government was still interested in water storage projects, and that they saw this as part of their regional development scheme. So, you know, the door isn't slammed closed and locked, but there are options there for water storage, and that's why I want to have a discussion some other time. We do need to do some work in, for example, Central Hawke's Bay, and carry on the work on the with Tank as to what are the water requirements, and we need to have some views about that. Leaning on the experience we've had from the RWSS, I think it needs to be farmer, user-led, supported by the council rather than the council trying to lead it and do the whole thing. They need to be commercially viable, because I don't think there's huge money to throw at this, at interest-free and so on. And they need to be pretty practical. And I think the regional council will need to talk to different groups about what it is they want, and I think we need to put ourselves in the position of being a supportive agency rather than a lead agency. And we might be in a way of helping sponsor some of this investigation to a degree, but how that shapes up yet, I'm not sure. But it'll need to be a conversation with the communities, and I think, again, community-led. Is that helpful? I moved it. All right. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Now let's move to items not on the agenda. Paul Bailey, if I recall, you were first out of the blocks.
Yes, I jumped in there, Chair.
You're going to talk about tallow and discharge.
Yep, they're actually interrelated in terms of they're both to do with the discharge that happened in the in Humber Street. One was a tallow spill, and what I just like to point out was our staff member from the pollution team, Mike, is it Albardi, was onto it like a rat up a drain pipe, and reported back through Wayne. Quite appropriate. Reported back via Wayne very quickly to all councillors, and certainly I got was copied into the email, and so I was able to say to calm down a number of members of the public about what was going on there, because we were onto it, and I look forward to the outcome from Wayne's investigation into that particular spill. And then just to, again, following up with Mike, I had a member of the public ring me up on Sunday and say that they were trying to make a complaint to the pollution hotline, but they weren't too sure about the answer phone message. So I rang up myself and again got hold of but Mike was very good. Went out to the complaint and phoned me up and said, "I'm in the right spot," and all that sort of stuff. So the response was really good. That's what I was driving at, and got a report back from the science team from some sampling that he'd done on Sunday. Got that back on Monday. So again, it was, does our reputation a world of good. So I'd just like to pass my thanks on to Mike. Much appreciated.
Thank you for that, Paul. Councillor Belford, something about outfalls, as I recall.
Well, in a similar vein, this comes back to Napier and the estuary. I had a chance to look at the Lagoima exchange material on the Marty Sharp article, and I guess my question is to the staff to get some sense of when the Napier discharge into the bay from its sewage treatment plant, what's the status of that? When does that get reviewed? The exchange seemed to indicate that the significant reason why Napier's system isn't able to do its job in relatively light rainfall in the scheme of things is because the outfall operates with insufficient capacity. And so the system is overloaded because of that, and that's why there are stormwater episodes and sewage overflows into the estuary. That was the gist of the article, and it was supported, I thought, by the actual exchange of emails amongst the various public officials involved, including our staff. And so I don't know whether we have any, or when our next opportunity is to address the workings of that system, specifically the treatment plant and the outfall and so forth. When does that next come up for any kind of review is my question.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor, I'll have to email you that information. I'm aware that it's been renewed in the last sort of 6 to 10 years, but I can't confirm specifically when, and it's likely that it has a 35-year consent duration, but again, I need to confirm that as well. So it is probably a fairly long-term, long time out until the full consent gets renewed again. But I will also look at the consent conditions and just see if there are any appropriate or relevant to the concern that has been raised. I agree that the information looks as though it's a capacity of the treatment plant. My understanding always was that it was more the capacity of the pumping capacity feeding into it, as opposed to the more up-to-date plant itself and the treatment and disposal or discharge to see that gives. It was more the age of the infrastructure around the city and its ability to pump at its sufficient capacity.
My reading of the information is entirely different, that it is the plant
and
the outfall.
Yeah, and that's what I said. So I was a bit surprised when I read that as well, because I'd always been led to believe it was the former, but yeah, I do understand from the Lagoima request that it's a plant as well. So we'll be looking into that and seeing if there's any relevant consent conditions as well.
I wish we would do that, because my concern is that we don't have another Central Hawke's Bay situation here where we've consented something, it isn't operating to the specs that it was supposed to operate, which is exactly the same parallel situation, and we're unable to do anything about it unless and until Napier decides it's going to actually invest the appropriate amount of money to fix the problem.
Yeah, we'll feed you that, or circulate that information.
We'll come back to concerned that we are, the raised matter items are not for debate, just so people can make things, but it's a really important issue you raised. Can I just close that one off by suggesting that we have put it on the matters to be followed up on, and that we have the staff at one of our informal meetings comes back with a report to explain to us exactly with some detail and particularity what the issues are here, and we've then got an informed discussion about it. Would that be satisfactory to you, Mr. Belford?
Well, Mr. Chairman, in fact, that was requested at the time of the incident, and now we're several months down the tube. I would have thought all of the answers that have the questions that have been raised should have answers by now. We should have a very clear perception of what's going on, and it appears we don't.
Well, we're going to get it. Right. Now, before I take you, Councillor Hewitt, I've got someone else who's going to exercise his rights, wants to raise the issue of kahupātaki. Mike.
Yes, just at the last Māori Committee meeting 6 weeks ago, the new delegate for Whanganui-Roto raised the matter that in terms of the water conservation order, that indeed it was only 2 ladies from their marae that had objected, and the marae trustees had no support of, and in fact it hadn't been raised at their meeting at all. As a consequence, James, Rex and I attended a trustee meeting, and they said that that was indeed true, and they sent a letter actually illustrating that the ladies were acting on their own part. A couple of nights ago, I got a call from one of the ladies, I was going to say affected, and she wanted, and at the meeting I actually congratulated the marae that they had, over the last 15 years, been involved in a planting program with Ngā Whenua and received $250,000. The complaint 2 nights ago was, so who authorised them to get the money, what did they do with it, etc., etc. And this is typical, I just want to bring you notice that this is typical marae politics. I informed them that there was no money exchanged, it was all done on receipts, and they also asked what happened with the regional council money when he bought a boat with council money. So I'm just letting you know that that's how it works. As soon as somebody does something, everybody else jumps on the bandwagon. I don't know what happens in Pākehā. Do they do the same thing?
Behaviour is never preserved. Councillor Hewitt.
I had a minor item. The Central Hawke's Bay update.
Being very liberal today.
Thank you. Well, 2 things. I finally dragged James down to our neck of the woods, and we had a half a day, a coastal drive from Porori down through to Blackhead, which was really good. My idea was to show James one of the more problematic properties, and then show him one of the best properties, but the best one, well, he was unavailable. Anyway, I appreciated you coming down, and I'm trying to get a handle on what we've actually got in actuality down there. Reality is how that's going to be overlaid from our long-term plan work. The other thing, I've been attending regularly are the water users meetings, and just to let you know, Councillor Barker, you had expressed an interest in what's going on with the group down there. They've set up a subcommittee, and our meeting a couple of nights ago, just points that were, I was an observer really, but points that were under discussion were with Irrigation New Zealand, how can global allocation consents work. They were looking at getting some of the data on actual usage as opposed to what's allocated, and then discussing sharing models. Some of the challenges around on-farm storage were discussed, and one of the biggest issues with on-farm storage with such a short time frame that was expressed was the fact that, for instance, it's going to be very hard to get enough kit into the area to build the dams that are required in the time frame allowed, given the amount of earthworks going on in Kaikoura, for instance. So physically you might be able to get 3 dams built in the next the next year, say, until we're really in trouble with the minimum flow allocations, but we certainly won't be able to be offsetting the impacts in that time frame with all of the affected parties. So land use change is already underway, and some of the discussions around what's going to happen with the decrease in food production. So irrigators at the moment, for instance, are able to often get 2 crops off in one season, and the impacts that would have on the supply chains and downstream processes were discussed, but just to let you know that working group is up and running, and interested councillors are invited to attend meetings at any time should they be interested to. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other late calls? Being none, I'll declare the meeting closed at 2:55 p.m.